Welcome to part 2 for chapter 14. So we left off talking about some of the ways that Freud's theories have informed the current fields of personality psychology and clinical psychology, but also we highlighted some of the ways that his research was problematic in that it was resistant to being disproven because he just wasn't willing to consider evidence that contradicted his ideas, and then also talked about how, in a lot of ways, his research was unethical because he bullied his patients into saying that treatment was working. So obviously there are a lot of aspects of Freud's work that are problematic and really haven't stood up to the test of time. But we do need to acknowledge, again, that a lot of his ideas have withheld and withstood in terms of being empirically investigated. So, in a lot of ways, I think our understanding of defense mechanisms, have stood up to empirical testing, trying to understand that people often are not aware of why they do the things they do. I mean, all of that came from Freud. And Freud also influenced a lot of scholars that came after him. Your textbook talks about Clara Thompson, Karen Horney, Carl Jung, all well-known psychologists. And it's certainly worth reading the section on their work because they took some of the flaws in Freud's work and tried to correct it. But let's shift gears now to talk about some of the more modern theories of personality psychology. So after Freud's day and age, the field of psychology entered this period where they really started to focus on assessment, and they really saw that as kind of the main contributing influence that clinical psychology could have on the world, was that we could try to help people better predict who would be good at certain jobs, who should go into the army, what type of academic supports students may or may not need. And so we really saw this kind of like big boom in terms of assessment measures. A lot of not surprising, a lot of the first measures that were developed were highly problematic. And so, we can talk about some of the good measures that came out of that day and age and some of the bad measures. For example, intelligence tests originated around that time, and they certainly have been improved upon, and the current intelligence tests are pretty good. But here we're focusing on personality. And so, one of the things that, started to develop was this idea that we could try to measure personality type. And I put type in quotations because, as we're going to talk about here, this is kind of a flawed way of measuring and talking about personality, with the main one being the Myers-Briggs. And so one of your assignments for this week was to take a Myers-Briggs and look at your results and talk about whether you felt like it was accurate or not accurate. And so, essentially what this measure is trying to do is it has you answer a range of questions, and then from that determines what type of personality type best fits you, or which one best fits the answers that you gave more specifically. And so overwhelmingly, the research has shown that the Myers-Briggs is unreliable and is not valid. But what's interesting is it's still often used, particularly in places of employment. You might have gone to a high school that had you take the Myers-Briggs, and then based on the personality type you received, they made recommendations on the type of career you should go into. And so this is really kind of a problematic way to measure personality, because the results are not consistent across time, and we know that personality is fairly consistent. And we also know that in terms of validity, it's not necessarily tapping into what is at the heart of most people's personalities. So instead, what we more currently do are called objective tests. And so these objective tests are going to measure traits. So again, those kind of core characteristics that make up people's personalities. And in fact, Allport, which is one of the more famous names associated with kind of the more contemporary way of talking about personality, helped us understand that not all traits have equal importance or relevance for people. So essentially, most of us have between 5 and 10 central traits, and so those are the core components of our personalities. And then we have more kind of transitory or changeable secondary traits that are certainly important, but aren't at the heart of our personalities. And so using this kind of conceptualization of central traits, our more current objective tests use hundreds and hundreds of items to try to determine what a person's central traits are. So, what are the most important and relevant traits for each individual person? And so, an example would be the MMPI, or Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. There's another one called the MCMI, so just lots of different acronyms. All of them are what we call standardized questionnaires. So, again, these are questions. Many of them hundreds and hundreds of questions, 500 items, 700 items. And essentially from the results, what we try to determine is what are the individual's, 5 to 10 central traits. And from that, we should be able to get a fairly accurate understanding of their personality traits and tendencies. And so what I mean by standardized is that thousands and thousands, and probably at this point, I would say it's at 1 million, people have taken these particular objective tests, and so from that they can determine whether someone is high on particular traits, low on particular traits, or average. And so using that, we can try to identify people's kind of most dominant or prominent traits. And I can tell you that I've taken both the MMPI and the MCMI, and I was shocked at how accurate my results were. Of course, we could talk about, whether I was biased, whether I wanted to see what I wanted to see, or saw what I wanted to see in my results. So there certainly are ways we could critique my own subjective experience, but I will say that I was shocked at how accurate the objective tests seemed for me. And so building on this, Cattell then came on the scene and said, I kind of like this idea that, there are these kind of central traits to people's personalities. And so he used the statistical approach called factor analysis. And I'm not going to go into super great detail about it, but essentially factor analysis helps us understand what items hang together. Essentially looking at a large number of items, a large number of traits, he tried to determine essentially patterns in those traits. And so from that, he identified what we call the Big Five. So the Big Five are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. To help you remember, there's a little cheat here. Ocean, you can see spelled out Ocean, is the trick to help you kind of remember that. So in terms of openness, what we're talking about is whether people are imaginative, are they excited to try new things? By conscientious, we mean, are they responsible? Are they reliable? Extroversion is how social the person is. Like, do they like being the center of attention, or are they uncomfortable by that? Agreeableness is whether they are forgiving and flexible and cooperative. And then neuroticism is anxiety. And so essentially, Cattell helped us better understand that we can characterize people's personalities on these essentially continua, right? So like on a range from open to resistant, conscientious to impulsive. It isn't a category. You're not open. It's how open are you? And so, another thing that Allport really helped us understand and really kind of hammered home that point I made earlier in the lecture is this idea that these are relatively stable traits across the life. But what we also know is that as people age, we do see minor changes. For example, young people, or when we are young, we tend to be at our highest levels of neuroticism and our lowest levels of agreeableness and conscientiousness. And then as we age, we see that those levels will shift. Not completely flip-flop, but they will shift a little bit in the other direction. We also know that situation can slightly adjust how people behave or what they're thinking or feeling. So think about how you behave around your parents versus around your friends. But generally speaking, these are very stable traits in individuals across their life.